Greetings everybody, Maximus here. I'm sure if United Airlines had had their way, the truth would have never come out about this incident. And in fact, they tried to keep it a secret from the flying public for as long as they could, even though the pilots on that flight did the right thing and told the airline exactly what and how it happened. Yet it's taken 8 long months for the truth to finally be revealed. On December 18, 2022, a United Airlines flight with almost 300 people on board, Flight 1722, was flying from Maui, Hawaii to San Francisco with a 22-year-old Boeing 777-200, registration N212UA. According to flight tracking software from Flight Radar 24, the plane took off at 2:49 p.m. and climbed to about 2,200 feet. At that point, the plane began a steep nosedive, descending at nearly 8,600 feet per minute, which would have produced nearly 2.7 G-forces. The plane continued its uncontrolled dive until it was just 775 feet, or about a little over 233 meters above sea level, or in other words, mere seconds from disaster. The entire incident lasted about 45 seconds. It is not clear if air traffic controllers even realized what happened, as there was no ATC audio recordings of the incident. Once the pilots managed to recover from the incident, they safely climbed to 33,000 feet and continued on to San Francisco in a flight time of 4 hours and 15 minutes, arriving 27 minutes ahead of schedule. The two pilots had a combined 25,000 plus hours of experience. But what is truly remarkable about this situation, especially in this day and age of social media, is the lack of attention it garnered until the air current broke the story almost 2 months later. You have to figure it must have been utterly terrifying for the passengers on board. Even if the turbulence was brief, descending at a rate of nearly 8,600 feet per minute immediately after takeoff, you would think somebody would have tweeted about it, especially considering they endured almost a 3G dive toward the Pacific Ocean. Unless the pilots and the flight attendants made sure to downplay the situation during the remainder of the flight, possibly reassuring the passengers that they were never in any danger. But before we get any further into this story, I want to add this disclaimer. Of course, I'm not a professional commercial airline pilot. The only plane I've ever flown is a single-engine Cessna 152 or 172. I'm relaying this story to you just as the NTSB published it as news. But I always like to make that clear if you're new to the channel. Okay, so let's all look at the report issued from the NTSB together, shall we? United Flight 1722 lost altitude about 1 minute after departure while in instrument meteorological conditions, which included heavy rain, wind with the possibility of wind shear. The airplane descended from 2,100 feet to about 748 feet above the water before the crew recovered from the descent. No injuries were reported and the airplane was not damaged. As hard as it is to believe, the NTSB wasn't even originally notified of the event, since it didn't meet the requirement of Title 49 Code of Federal Regulations Part 830.5. Title 49 basically states, and I'm really nutshelling this, that unless death or injury or damage to the aircraft occurs as a result of the incident or accident, it isn't mandated that cockpit voice or data recordings be preserved. However, the NTSB learned of the event about 2 months later in the news and chose to open an investigation. 2 months. Boy, that was quite a delay by United Airlines. By that time, both cockpit voice and flight data recorder durations had been exceeded and recorded over multiple times. The captain who was piloting the aircraft reported that he and the first officer had initially planned for a flap setting of 20 degrees for takeoff, with a reduced thrust setting based on performance calculations. However, during the taxi, the ground controller advised them that low-level wind shear advisories were in effect. Based on this information, the captain said he chose a flaps 20 maximum thrust takeoff instead. He hand flew the takeoff with the auto throttles engaged. During the takeoff, the rotation and initial climb were normal. However, as the airplane continued to climb, the flight crew noticed airspeed fluctuations as the airplane encountered turbulence. When the airplane reached the acceleration altitude, the captain reduced the pitch altitude, lowering the nose slightly, and called for the flap setting to be reduced to flaps 5. But according to the first officer, he thought that he heard the captain announce flaps 15, which the first officer selected before contacting the departure controller and discussing the weather conditions. But the captain noticed that the maximum operating speed indicator moved to a lower value than expected, and the airspeed began to accelerate rapidly. The captain reduced the engine thrust manually, overriding the auto throttle servos to avoid a flap overspeed, and began to diagnose the flap condition. He noticed that the flap indicator was showing 15 degrees, and he again called for flaps 5, and he confirmed that the first officer moved the flap handle to the 5 position. The first officer stated that he knew the captain was having difficulty with airspeed control, and he queried the captain about it as he considered if his own right side instrumentation may have been in error. He did not receive an immediate response from the captain. Both pilots recalled that at about this time, the airplane's pitch attitude was decreasing and the airspeed was increasing. The first officer recalled that the captain asked for flaps 1 soon after he called for flaps 5, and when the first officer set the flaps to 1, he then noticed the airspeed had further increased and the control column moving forward. Both pilots recalled hearing the initial warnings from the ground proximity warning system, and the first officer recalled announcing pull up, along with the initial GPWS warnings. The captain then pulled aft on the control column, initially reduced power to reduce airspeed, and then applied full power to begin the full CFIT controlled flight into terrain recovery. The first officer recalled that as the captain was performing the recovery, the GPWS alerted again as the descent began to reverse trend. Data showed this occurred about 748 feet above the water. After noting a positive rate of climb, the captain lowered the nose to resume a normal profile, ensured that the flaps and speed brakes were fully retracted, and engaged the autopilot. The remainder of the flight was uneventful. As a result of the event, United Airlines modified one of its operation training modules to address this occurrence and issued an awareness campaign about flight path management at its training center. Probable cause and findings of the National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable causes of this incident to be the flight crew's failure to manage the airplane's vertical flight path, airspeed, and pitch attitude following a miscommunication about the captain's desired flap setting during the initial climb. Okay, so after reading that final report, what logical decision would you come up with? The first officer screwed up, right? By not listening to the captain. Well, not so fast. First, let's take a look at the pilots. The unidentified captain sitting in the left seat was a 55-year-old male with almost 20,000 hours as a pilot, with 5,000 of those hours on the Boeing 777. The first officer, also a male whose age wasn't listed but obviously much younger, had 5,300 total hours as a pilot with 120 hours on the 777, all in the past 90 days. But according to the captain and the first officer's individual statements, they seem to be at odds with each other. I'll post a link to the entire crew debrief as it's pretty long and I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to be, so you can read it at your own leisure. But in a nutshell, the captain insisted he did everything by the book and never called for the flaps to be at 15, nor did he inadvertently push the 777 into a nose-down attitude towards the Pacific Ocean. However, the first officer said the captain never asked for flaps at 15, but did ask twice for flaps at 5. In his statement, the co-pilot said, "I instantly recognized the severity of our situation. I looked down and noticed our airspeed was 20 to 30 knots past the VFE limit, or the maximum flap extended speed with the altimeter falling, and the pitch around 8 degrees to 10 degrees nose down. I announced to the captain, pull up, pull up, pull up, pull up, many times as the GPWS enunciated the same thing. The captain then brought the yoke aft, increasing our pitch angle, and pulled the thrust to idle. Then as the captain began a positive pitch trend, the captain then increased the thrust to maximum and called flaps up, performing an escape maneuver. At the same moment, I checked the speed brakes and heard terrain, pull up, as our descent stopped and reversed trend around 800 feet above the water on the radar altimeter. Then our pitch increased to over 20 degrees nose up and our airspeed trend reversed and then held at around 230 knots as our VFE limit went to the flaps up normal limit. The first officer concluded by saying the captain said he did pitch forward the plane but didn't think he pitched forward enough to cause such a dramatic pitch change and concluded that we must have hit wind shear or a downdraft. Neither of us heard or witnessed the predictive or reactive wind shear warnings, but we did hear the ground proximity warnings. Neither of us witnessed an airspeed trend or VSI indications of a wind shear event. Like I said, I'll post links down below so you can read all this as deeply as you would like. So whether you believe the captain's version or the first officer's version, which personally I tend to believe was more accurate, the one thing I want to leave you with is this. The world needs more trained pilots, not less. And all these airlines that are dreaming of one-pilot cockpits for commercial aircraft are bat crap crazy. Regardless of whose fault this incident was, because there were 2 crew members on the flight deck, they figured it out, and everybody got home safely. Now I know you have a ton of comments on this one, and I want to hear every one of them. So don't click off until you left me your thoughts down below. As always, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and ring the bell so you can be notified whenever we release new content. And remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.